If you had been standing in a Detroit church in the early 1950s, watching a young girl slide onto the piano bench for her first solo, you would have heard something unusual in her voice. The congregation heard it too. The sound carried weight that a child should not yet know how to carry. There was sorrow threaded through the notes, a depth that seemed borrowed from somewhere older than her years.
It is a peak within the song, but if you have range, you make that peak.
Yeah.
That girl would grow up to become the Queen of Soul. 18 Grammy Awards, more than 75 million records sold, the first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Presidents would request her presence. Critics would call her the greatest vocalist of any generation. But the sorrow in that little girl's voice was not performance. It was memory already forming. Her mother had already left. Within years, her mother would be dead. And the losses would keep coming. Early motherhood before she could drive. A violent marriage. Siblings dying one after another. Aretha Franklin built an empire on her voice. She also built walls around her pain. This is the story of what she carried. Aretha Louise Franklin entered the world in 1942, born in Memphis, Tennessee, to a family where music and ministry were inseparable. Her father, C.L. Franklin, was a Baptist preacher whose sermons could hold a congregation transfixed for hours. His voice had a rhythm and cadence that people traveled miles to hear. Her mother, Barbara Siggers, played piano and sang with a gift that her daughter would inherit and eventually surpass. By 1947, the family had relocated north to Detroit. C.L. Franklin took over New Bethel Baptist Church, and under his leadership, the congregation swelled. His reputation spread far beyond the city limits. His sermons were eventually recorded and sold across the country, making him one of the first celebrity preachers of his era. The church became the center of everything for the Franklin family. But the Franklin home on Oakland Avenue became something else entirely, a salon for gospel royalty passing through Detroit. Mahalia Jackson visited that house. Clara Ward passed through its doors regularly. These were not distant figures heard on the radio. They were guests at the dinner table, friends of the family, voices filling the living room with the greatest gospel music in America. Young Aretha watched everything, absorbing every vocal run, every emotional shift, every technique that made these women legends. She learned piano in that house, picking out melodies while gospel titans performed feet away. She learned to sing by studying masters who happened to be family friends. The education was informal but unparalleled. No conservatory could have matched it. The house on Oakland Avenue looked blessed from the outside, a prominent minister gaining national recognition. A talented family surrounded by legends, gospel stars at the dinner table, music filling every room. What the congregation could not see was the fracture forming at the center of that blessed household. What the visitors who came to hear C.L. Franklin preach never suspected was that behind the hymns and hospitality, a marriage was falling apart. C.L. Franklin's infidelities had been eroding the marriage for years. Barbara Siggers endured the betrayals as long as she could, but eventually, the accumulation became unbearable. In 1948, when Aretha was just 6 years old, her mother made a decision that would echo through her daughter's entire life. Barbara left Detroit and returned to Buffalo, taking her eldest son with her, while Aretha and the younger children stayed with their father. She left her husband. To the little girl left behind in Detroit, it felt like her mother had left her too. A 6-year-old cannot fully comprehend why a mother leaves. The reasons adults give, incompatibility, unhappiness, the need to escape, make no sense to a child who only knows that the most important person in her world has chosen to live somewhere else. What a child can understand is absence. She can understand that the person who was supposed to be there is suddenly gone far away. She can understand that the house feels different, emptier, that something essential has been removed and will not return in quite the same way. Aretha's sister later recounted that the young girl cried for days after Barbara's departure. the child who had been learning to fill church halls with her voice went quiet. She withdrew into herself, pulling away from a world that had just demonstrated its capacity for abandonment. The outgoing little performer became guarded and watchful. Some children learn early that the people meant to protect them might one day disappear. Aretha learned this lesson at 6. The knowledge cut deep enough to shape how she would move through the world for the rest of her life. 4 years later, the wound tore open again. Barbara Siggers died of a heart attack in 1952. She had been living in Buffalo, New York, away from the Detroit home where her youngest children still lived, when her heart gave out. Aretha was not yet 10 years old when word arrived that her mother was gone permanently. The double loss shattered her. First separation, then death. First the choice to leave, then the finality of never coming back. Relatives who watched her in the weeks following the funeral feared she might never recover. She went nearly speechless, as though grief had stolen her voice along with everything else. The child who sang for congregations could barely form sentences, and yet she found a place to put it. She sat at the piano in her father's house, tears running down her face, and she played. She played for hours. The keys did not leave her. The music did not abandon her. When people failed and words failed and the world felt impossible to navigate, there was still the instrument, still the notes, still the structure that could contain what threatened to spill over. Producer Jerry Wexler, who would later help shape her career, called her Our Lady of Mysterious Sorrows. He said anguish surrounded her as surely as the glory of her musical gift. He heard it in every note she sang throughout her career, quality that could not be taught or manufactured. What he was hearing had roots in that Detroit living room. A child at a piano, discovering that grief could be transformed into sound, that pain could be given shape and released through the keys. The lesson she learned at that piano would guide her artistry for the next 6 decades. While Aretha was still a child processing her mother's death, still finding refuge at the piano, life demanded more from her than any girl that age should have been asked to give. In 1955, while still barely out of childhood herself, she gave birth to her first son, Clarence. She was only just reaching junior high age, still learning long division, still years away from driving a car, and now responsible for another human life. 2 years later, she welcomed a second son, Edward. Both children took the Franklin family name, and the circumstances around those pregnancies were something Aretha never discussed publicly, not then and not in the decades that followed. The 1950s handled such situations with silence, particularly in respectable church families. Scandal was managed through discretion. What mattered was that the children were cared for, that appearances were maintained, that the gifted young singer could continue developing the voice everyone recognized as extraordinary. Aretha's grandmother Rachel and her older sister Irma stepped in to raise the boys while Aretha pursued her musical path. It was an arrangement born of necessity. The gift could not be ignored. The voice demanded attention and development. The career forming on the horizon required focus and sacrifice. Her sister Irma later described those years as a time of silent suffering. The phrase captures something essential about how Aretha moved through the world. She kept singing. She kept touring with her father's gospel troupe, sharing stages with the legends who had once gathered in her living room. She kept climbing toward the future everyone could see waiting for her, and she carried the weight of what she had experienced, what she had given up, what had been asked of her before she had any framework for understanding it. She returned to school briefly after Clarence's birth and performed well academically, demonstrating a mind that matched her voice. But by 1957, expecting Edward, she dropped out to focus entirely on music. The practical choice, the sensible path forward. Whatever private cost accompanied that decision, whatever grief or guilt or confusion she felt, she locked it away where no one could access it. The public saw a gifted young gospel singer following in her famous father's footsteps, a prodigy destined for greatness. The private story was far more complicated, far heavier than anyone outside the family knew. Aretha was already learning the lesson that would define her approach to fame for decades. Some burdens were hers alone to carry. Some doors stayed closed no matter who came knocking. Some truths remained private no matter how famous she became. At 18, Aretha Franklin arrived in New York City, determined to become a star. In 1960, she signed with Columbia Records, one of the most prestigious labels in the music industry. The preacher's daughter from Detroit had landed a major record deal. Everything she had worked toward, everything the gift had promised, seemed finally within reach. Then, 6 years passed, and the breakthrough refused to arrive. The star-making moment everyone anticipated kept getting delayed, pushed back, deferred by decisions that were not hers to make. Columbia's producers heard a talented vocalist and decided to make her a pop singer. They wrapped her voice in sophisticated arrangements designed for crossover appeal. They gave her standards and show tunes, the kind of material that had worked for other artists seeking broad audiences. They smoothed out every rough edge, every gospel flourish, every element that made her distinctive. The goal was elegance. The goal was mainstream acceptance. The goal was to transform a gospel-rooted soul singer into something safer and more commercially predictable. The results were professional and forgettable. She recorded album after album. She had modest chart presence. Critics acknowledged her obvious talent. Anyone with ears could tell this woman could sing. But nothing Columbia released captured what made Aretha Franklin extraordinary. The record sounded like 100 other competent vocalists of the era. The fire was missing. Her gospel foundation, the very thing that set her apart from every other singer in New York, was being treated as a problem to solve rather than a strength to amplify. The producers believed they knew better than the artist herself what audiences wanted. They were wrong, and Aretha's career treaded water while they refused to recognize the error. 6 years of wrong fit, 6 years of being molded into someone she was not. 6 years of frustration watching her potential remain unrealized because the people in charge did not understand what they had. By 1966, the mismatch had become undeniable to everyone involved. Columbia had wasted 6 years of her prime, 6 years of a once-in-a-generation talent being packaged incorrectly. She needed collaborators who grasped what she actually was, who would stop trying to fix what was not broken and start building on the foundation she had been developing since childhood in her father's church. Jerry Wexler signed Aretha Franklin to Atlantic Records in 1966, and he had no intention of repeating Columbia's mistakes. He understood that her gospel foundation was the source of everything powerful about her voice. His job was to create a frame worthy of what she already possessed, not to sand down her edges until she resembled everyone else. He took her to Fame Studios in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. The house musicians there, a group of white Southerners who had been crafting some of the grittiest soul recordings in the country, seemed an unlikely match for a black gospel singer from Detroit. The collaboration made little sense on paper. In the studio, with instruments in hand and tape rolling, it produced something transformative. In early 1967, Aretha recorded "I Never Loved a Man the Way I Love You" at those sessions. The song captured what 6 years at Columbia had completely missed: raw emotion, gospel intensity, a voice finally allowed to operate at full power. The track reached #1 on the R&B charts and became her first million-selling single. The breakthrough had arrived. A month later came the song that would follow her for the rest of her life and beyond. Otis Redding had written "Respect" as a tired man's plea to his woman, asking for basic consideration when he came home. Aretha seized the song and rebuilt it from the ground up. Her version was not a plea. It was a declaration. It was a demand. Her spelling out of R-E-S-P-E-C-T became something far larger than the song that contained it. The track topped both the R&B and pop charts simultaneously. It became an anthem for the civil rights movement sweeping the nation. It became an anthem for women demanding to be heard after generations of being overlooked. It became a permanent fixture in American culture, a song that would outlive its era and continue resonating decades later. The hits accumulated rapidly after that. "Chain of Fools," "You Make Me Feel Like a Natural Woman," "Think." By 1968, she had won 2 Grammy Awards and earned 5 gold-certified singles. Time magazine featured her on its cover as Lady Soul, recognizing that her music channeled pain, sorrow, and resilience into something audiences could feel in their bones. The Queen of Soul had claimed her throne. The title would stay with her for the rest of her life and beyond, but the crown brought scrutiny alongside celebration. The spotlight that illuminated her gift would soon reveal wounds she had worked for years to conceal. Fame protected nothing. If anything, it made exposure more likely. While Aretha's career was reaching heights no one could have predicted, her personal life was fracturing along familiar lines. In 1961, at 19 years old, she had married her road manager, Theodore "Ted" White. Their son Teddy arrived in 1964. From the outside, the marriage appeared to be a sensible partnership. Husband and wife working together to build a career, sharing the labor and the rewards. Inside the marriage, something far darker was unfolding. Ted White was accused of being physically rough with her. A 1968 Time profile referenced several incidents without providing explicit details. The magazine's restraint did not conceal the pattern, which was clear to those close enough to witness it. The relationship that was supposed to support and protect her had become a source of harm. When press coverage exposed the situation, Aretha confronted a narrative she found intolerable. She despised being cast as a beaten woman, despised being reduced to a tragic figure for public consumption. She loved blues music, the tradition of heartbreak and hard times transformed into art, but she refused to become a blues stereotype herself. The framing offended her sense of dignity. It collapsed her complexity into a single sad story when she was vastly more than that. The marriage ended in 1969. She walked away from Ted White, reclaiming control over both her career and her public image. But the experience calcified something within her. She became intensely protective of her privacy from that point forward, constructing a public persona of contentment and domestic stability. Happy home, happy children, everything proceeding smoothly. Biographer David Ritz observed that this image construction was deliberate and unrelenting. She wanted to control what people believed about her. She had witnessed what happened when truth escaped, had watched journalists transform her suffering into entertainment for strangers. She resolved to prevent that from happening again. In 1970, she had a fourth son, Kecaf, with her bandleader Ken Cunningham. In 1978, she married actor Glynn Turman, a union that dissolved by 1984. Through both relationships and both endings, she raised 4 sons largely on her own, with support from extended family. Through all of it, she permitted almost no one to see the difficulty. The public witnessed a queen on stages and in interviews. The private woman was raising children, managing a demanding career, processing grief and disappointment, and concealing all of it behind a composed exterior. The gap between the two versions of Aretha Franklin, the public icon and the private person, would only widen as the years continued. The 1980s brought Aretha Franklin continued professional success. Her voice retained its power. Her albums charted. She had achieved genuine longevity in an industry that discards artists casually. While peers from her era faded from relevance, she remained vital and working, still commanding stages and recording studios. But the decade also delivered a sequence of losses that would have broken someone less practiced at survival. In 1979, her father, C.L. Franklin, was shot during a burglary at his Detroit home. The bullet left him with severe brain damage. He slipped into a coma that would last 5 years. For half a decade, Aretha watched the man who had built her foundation hover between life and death. The preacher whose voice had commanded congregations could no longer speak. The father who had created her first platform could not recognize his own children when they came to visit. In 1984, he finally passed away. She had now lost both parents. Her mother to separation and then early death. Her father to violence and then prolonged decline. The preacher whose church had been her first stage, whose home had hosted the gospel legends who shaped her, was gone. The losses continued, if not all at once, then in a steady, punishing line. In 1988, her sister Carolyn died of cancer, taking with her a songwriter, confidant, and one of the few people who understood Aretha from the inside out. The next year, her brother Cecil, who had managed her career and often shielded her from the harsher edges of the business, died after a heart attack linked to lung cancer. More than a decade later, in 2002, her sister Irma died of throat cancer, closing a chapter that had begun back in the crowded Franklin house on Oakland Avenue. Over those years, she buried her father and all 3 siblings. The family that had surrounded her since birth, the support system that had helped raise her children and understood her history, had nearly vanished. She was increasingly alone with her memories of them. Her nephew Tim Franklin described how she navigated these years. She stepped quietly into the role of family caretaker, assuming responsibilities others might have avoided. She did what needed doing. She put her own grief aside, publicly at least, and focused on holding what remained of the family structure together. The pattern she had established decades earlier held firm. When her mother left, she had gone to the piano. When her mother died, she found refuge in music. When her marriage crumbled, she threw herself into work. Now, as her family contracted around her, she kept performing. She kept the grief private. She processed it in song, in prayer, in places no audience would ever access. Through everything, faith remained constant. Her nephew said she reached out to the one who sustained her, the God she had been singing to since childhood. As late as 2015, she told an interviewer that her faith never fails her. The lesson she had absorbed in her father's church, burying her mother at age 10, proved durable across decades of loss. When everything else disappeared, when family and health and youth all faded, she held on to hope. She held on to prayer. She held on to the gospel that had formed her. The honors accumulated across her final decades, recognition of a career that had permanently reshaped American music. In 1987, she became the first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. In 1994, she received a Kennedy Center honor, the youngest recipient of that distinction at the time. The Grammys bestowed both their Legend Award and Lifetime Achievement Award upon her. Detroit renamed a street Aretha Franklin Way in 2017. Billboard declared her the greatest female R&B artist in history. Rolling Stone placed her at the summit of their list of greatest singers ever, without qualification by gender or genre. She entered the Gospel Music Hall of Fame, the UK Music Hall of Fame, the National Women's Hall of Fame. In 2019, a year after her death, she became the first female musician to receive a Pulitzer Prize special citation for her contributions to American music. Her 1972 live album Amazing Grace, recorded in a Los Angeles church, sold more than 2 million copies. At the peak of her mainstream fame, she had circled back to gospel and produced one of the best-selling sacred albums in history. The church had never released its claim on her, even as she dominated the secular charts. President Barack Obama articulated her significance after her 2015 Kennedy Center performance. "American history wells up when Aretha sings," he observed. He spoke of how she embodied the connection between African American spirituals, blues, R&B, and rock. He spoke of hardship and sorrow transformed into beauty, vitality, and hope. That transformation was the core of her gift. She converted childhood abandonment into vocal depth audiences could feel. She channeled silent suffering into performances that shook stadiums. She took a violent marriage, a mountain of accumulated grief, and the weight of decades of hidden struggle, and she made all of it sing. When she died in August 2018, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Fans in New York covered subway stations bearing the name Franklin with RESPECT stickers. Televised memorials stretched across days, filled with artists performing her songs in tribute. The tributes arrived from presidents, pop stars, gospel choirs, jazz musicians, from everyone her voice had reached across 6 decades of recording and performing. Whitney Houston had grown up studying her recordings. Jennifer Hudson had analyzed her phrasing. Alicia Keys had built upon her foundation. Generations of singers recognized in Aretha Franklin proof that a gospel-trained woman could conquer popular music without abandoning the roots that made her powerful. She had opened a door that countless artists would walk through after her. Aretha Franklin lived 76 years, 18 Grammys, 75 million records sold, a voice capable of filling stadiums and reducing strangers to tears. She became a symbol for women who heard in her singing a demand for recognition that transcended any individual song. She was also a woman who lost her mother twice before age 10. A woman who became a mother while still a child herself. A woman who endured violence and then fought against being defined by it for the rest of her public life. A woman who buried her father and her siblings and kept singing while the grief accumulated inside her, year after year. She spoke about these private struggles rarely, strongly preferring to project success and contentment. The privacy she maintained was intentional. She had learned young that revealing pain invited pity, and she could not tolerate pity. So she redirected the pain into something productive. She channeled it into her music, into every note she sang. Every performance carried the weight of survival. Listen closely to her recordings, and the sorrow becomes audible beneath the power. But so does the resilience. So does the faith she never abandoned. So does the determination to transform what hurt her into something capable of lifting others. The Queen of Soul earned her title through extraordinary, once-in-a-lifetime talent. She maintained it through sheer endurance. The voice that sounded like triumph had been shaped by grief. The woman who demanded respect had more than earned the authority to demand it. She demonstrated that strength does not require the absence of wounds. It requires building something meaningful from them. It requires singing when words fail. It requires holding faith when everything familiar falls away. It requires getting back up again and again when life keeps knocking you down. Aretha Franklin carried battles her audiences never witnessed. She transformed those battles into songs her audiences will never forget. That was her gift. That was her burden. That was her legacy, left for generations who would never meet her but would always feel the power of what she built from her pain.